Coming up next on 2 News at 5, a local developer wants to build a house, but wait until you hear where he wants to build it. It's creating a controversy in the northwest suburbs.
I'm concerned about this because I believe it's history, it's heritage, and I think there's something should be said for the dead, the sacrosanct.
The controversy in Schaumburg, it has to do with a small plot of land on which a local developer wants to build a house. But neighbors there say the plot of land was the site of an old cemetery. Channel 2's Lisa Kim has more.
This piece of land off Cedarcrest Drive may not look like a cemetery, but Tom Turner believes it is.
Tom was very active in politics when he first came here in the 60s. I shouldn't say politics. He's not a politician. He was active in city government. I believe he was on the zoning board. And as a case in point, he received a call in the late 60s from the electric company because they were laying underground cable. And as they were trenching across that property, suddenly bones started to come up from the ground, human bones. And Tom came over and explained to him, yeah, there's a cemetery here for crying. Tom knew that there were bodies here. He knew it was a graveyard. My son at that time came to me and said, well, hey, Dad, you've been talking about this lot. Why don't you do something about it? Why don't you call the newspapers or stop them from doing this? What can you do? And actually, there's very little I could do. But I did. I called the local paper, the Herald, and I talked to the Schaumburg reporter and explained to him, what was going on. And I said, look, it's approaching Halloween at this point in time. It would probably make a very good story for you because I think you could probably tie this into Poltergeist, like Poltergeist East.
I received a phone call one morning from CBS television, and they wanted to do a segment on it.
I'm at work, and I get a call from my wife, and she's saying, you get home right now. And I didn't know what happened. I thought maybe something happened here or whatever.
I hung up then, and then, of course, I immediately called my friend Tom Turner.
He came over with a piece of a tombstone to show to the press. And, of course, he couldn't prove that piece came from the cemetery, but nevertheless, he was trying to give validity to all of this, and he did.
This is, as I remember it to be, exactly what I remembered it to be of the headstones that were on these graves here.
And at the same time, the village manager came over, and the village manager presented the village's position.
So it was just sitting there. It was in the middle of a residential subdivision. They wanted to build a house there, and it was kind of a sloping lot. It had a higher end in the back and then kind of sloped down, so it would be a nice walkout. And in that process, it was discovered that in the rear of the lot, it appeared to be possibly some graves, 2 or 3 or 4 graves back sitting there in the rear of the lot. We didn't know about it. We were checking some of the historical legal documents, trying to determine if there was ever a cemetery there or something. We couldn't quite determine that one way or the other. And I think Tom Turner, Tom was a village resident, had some concern about it, all that stuff, and he was, what I remember, was somewhat concerned and vocal about it. So what we did, we eventually called up NIU and had one of their professors come out who, in their archaeological division, and in fact asked him to do a survey of the property and study it and give us a report as to whether those in fact were possibly grave sites or not.
No, I cannot tell you that there are no graves there. We didn't start the project with the idea of really focusing on locating individual burials. What we wanted to do was to find out the extent of disturbance in the lot. If you're actually looking for a grave shaft, you can't hope to find one using only a post hole digger. Our recommendation was to do more extensive work in that east area. If the city wanted to find out unequivocally whether there were graves left or not, then it would require an additional project. Bring in a backhoe or a bobcat or something like that to remove that top layer of soil and expose the subsoil, and in hopes of finding grave shafts. 2 or 3 days maximum of actual field work, and then another week or 2 weeks of analysis, report writing. The costs are not prohibitive. Say the next stage of work maybe would run from $2,000 to $5,000, maybe $7,000 tops.
Do you think they should?
Do what?
Phase 2.
Sure. I'm curious to find out what's there.
So we were 99.9% convinced it wasn't. In fact, we were 100% convinced it wasn't because we didn't do any more with it.
Yeah?
Yeah. So that's kind of the story behind Cedarcrest.
How can the village make a blanket statement that there is not a doubt in their mind when professional archaeologists have come to this site, looked at it, and said, this ground has been disturbed, but they don't know why it's been disturbed. And they've turned to the city and said, please allow us to do a proper dig. And the city has refused, or the city has elected not to pursue it.
I remember reading the story in the newspaper about Mr. Turner, who was a neighbor to the cemetery. I remember reading it then and never really thought much about it. It was just a story in the newspaper. I didn't live in that area, so I wasn't really familiar with, where this was. And then it was this sesquicentennial committee. When I started working with them, and I started to put together the calendar. So one of the pages in the calendar was going to be a page with just cemeteries. And then we thought about the old cemetery in Ceres Grove. They've never put a fence around it, it's just a vacant lot. After reading all of this and knowing all that it had gone into trying to determine that this was a cemetery, I thought, this is silly. It is a cemetery. And I knew that they knew all of this. And that's when I said, it just seems to be a very appropriate time to do something. That this is a cemetery, you need to put a marker there. And forever it will be a peaceful, place. And the people can rest in peace.
A stone has been put at the base of the lot. They indicate that there's a probability that there was a graveyard here. But even the stone itself is very inconclusive as far as whether there was one or is one there at this point in time.
That was one of the reasons that I think the village agreed to put the marker there. It was in the wording. I don't think they could definitely say it was, but it was believed.
I believe the area should be identified. It should be marked off appropriately, either with railings or something like this, and a significant memorial put up there, because that's what this is. It's the burial place of the first settlers of Schaumburg. It's a very significant historical event. And it should be appropriately addressed and appropriately marked.
It would have cost several $1,000s, and it was evident to us that it just wasn't warranted to do that. It was evident there wasn't anything there. They were pretty well convinced, and we were too.
As far as money is concerned, good Lord, how much did it cost him to plant the trees going down Schaumburg Road? There was no money issue there. It's not history, it's a beautification project. It's a nice thing, it's a good thing that they did it, but please, they should not insult us by saying, oh, this is going to be expensive. It seems to me that there are a few people who simply don't want to get involved. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't make fiscal sense. It doesn't make historical sense. But what they're doing is they're denying the citizens of Schaumburg the right to know their roots, the right to know who put this whole thing together. Where are they? I think it's a great loss for the city and for the citizens not to pursue this. That block, that granite block, sends no message to anyone. Well, I'll say what Tom said. Okay, it's a start. Now, where are you going from here?
I think Mr. Turner must have felt some of the same things that I felt. I'm sure he did. I could never ask him that. It would have been very interesting to ask him if he felt some of those same feelings, that he knew those people wanted to be left there in peace, that they just wanted to have a peaceful place to rest.
Tom died August 20th, 1998, and the memorial was put in 2 years ago, so he missed it by about 2 years, but he probably knows about it. I'm sure that he does know about it.
He worried that when he died, that somehow they would, you know, once they found out he had died, that somebody would come back and try to do it. But now that they've got the monument there, I think we're pretty safe for now, that at least somebody recognized it. And I think that would have made him feel really good. You know, I'm sorry he didn't live to see that. But in his mind, it was a graveyard, and it was worth saving, and that's what he did.
He must have been a very frustrated person. And in a way, I felt that after all that he went through, I just walked in and said, you need to do this. And they did it.
He was concerned. I mean, I don't know whether he, once he got notoriety in the press, whether he was just grandstanding or whether he was very serious about it. I think he had some concern about it, had some strong feelings about it, and then I think when it got in the press and got in the paper, I think he was doing a little grandstanding personally.
I would not use that word. He was not a grandstander in my way of thinking.
I think there's a lot of politics, and I think that they don't like people that stir up controversy or make waves.
And that was Tom. That was his essence. He was a man who, when he saw value in something, nothing would get in his way. He'd be a gadfly to anyone. All you have to do is sell him on its importance. He would give his time, he would give his energy, and he would spend money helping people. And he was not a wealthy man. It was just that he cared. He cared about the city, he cared about his family, he cared about the area.
His wife Betty came and asked about his tombstone for his grave site. And I said, well, Tom, a friend, a family friend, but by far personally to me, he was my crusader. And she used the word on the tombstone, which I thought a lot about.
He taught me to face challenges that I never would have taken on, you know, just because it was worthwhile or something that would be good to do. I was pretty lucky to be married to somebody like that, you know, because I got to be part of most of it, you know, and we did. We made a good team. We were together. We were one, you know, and that's why it's so hard for me without him. But there's no way he'd want me to feel sorry for myself. I mean, he believed in living every day, and so that's what you got to do.
The thing I would say about Tom is that he leaves footprints in your life. They never go away. That's him. You're always a better person as a result of being with this guy. People who didn't know him would make light of Tom and Tom's accomplishments. People who knew him were uplifted to a point that they would never forget him ever.